Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
This didn't happen to me, but it happened to a close friend of mine, and she has told me that she wishes to stay anonymous, but I can tell you that she's in her 20s and she's very attractive. I will write this story as if it happened to me though, so you can hear it the way my friend told it. I had been working late at the office pretty much all week, which caused me to miss my regular bus ride home. Usually, if I wasn't working late, then I would get off the train and then get the bus. But as I mentioned, I was working late, so I had to get a taxi home all week. On the night that this experience took place, I got off the train and I saw that there was only one other person waiting in line for a taxi at our usual spot. I was relieved because at least I wasn't going to be in line for a long time. But just as I was about to stand in line, a man came running down the station steps, and then he ran ahead of me and then got in line. This both surprised and annoyed me, but I couldn't really do anything about it. I should have rushed to get in line myself, I guess. I tried to not let it bother me, since it would only be a short wait until I would be on my way home. I then lined up behind the man. After waiting for about 15 minutes, a taxi turned up and then picked up the first person waiting in line, who was a middle-aged woman. Then, the metal shutters to the train station stairs behind me slammed closed. It was later than I thought. I even wondered if the lights in the station will go out and all the staff would leave. I didn't want to be here alone. Well, I wasn't alone yet. The man who pushed in front of me was still waiting on his taxi. And moments later, a taxi pulled up and the man got in. Before he got in, I think we were waiting for another 20 minutes. This was much longer than usual. And I come to think of it, the first taxi that pulled up was black, and the second one was black. Was it just the one taxi driver working? So, I made sure to take a look at the driver's face. I then continued waiting there alone, and it was a little unnerving. I hoped that a taxi would turn up soon, because I didn't like being on my own in a dark area so late. And then finally, after about another 20 minutes or so, a black taxi pulled up, and it was the same driver that I saw earlier. I got in, and I was tired of standing there, and I'm glad to be able to sit down. I told the driver where I wanted to go, and I asked if he could drop me off a certain location. I asked, "Hi, can you take me to the construction yard?" The reason I asked for the construction yard was because it was really close to my apartment, and drivers and delivery people can never seem to find where I live. The construction yard was well known, so I always asked to get dropped off of there. And with that, we pulled away into the night. It was dark, summer had gone and autumn was here. The taxi driver then said, "Sounds like hard work. Are you going there to work the night shift?" I was a bit too tired to enter into a conversation with the driver, so I replied something simple like, "Yeah, I guess." I am always cautious when giving out personal information. He didn't need to know, so I kept it vague. We got closer to the construction yard, and I started to route around my bag to get the taxi fare. "Do you really work at one of those office buildings by the construction yard?" the driver asked me. What a nosy guy, I thought. "No, I don't," I replied to him a little sharply. I didn't know what he was trying to get at. Why did it matter where I worked to him? And as soon as I told him that I didn't actually work there and I wasn't going on the night shift, he changed. Instead of pulling over by the construction yard, he then sped up and kept going straight. "Hey, you can drop me off here. You're going past it," I said. I started to panic. I didn't know what to do and he didn't say a word. He just looked focused on the road ahead. "Excuse me, driver, here is fine. Let me out," I said. I could now hear the fear in my voice. It had a shaky quality to it. "You got in my taxi on Tuesday night, didn't you?" Yeah, I remember you," he said while glancing at me in his rearview mirror. He was showing no signs of stopping the taxi, and I was really scared now. I was scared of where this was all heading, or where we were heading. I had taken a taxi every night that week, but what did it matter? Why was this guy so invested? I sat there frozen in the back seats of the taxi. I can still remember the song that was playing on the radio and the smell of the leather seats. I couldn't understand what was happening. We drove for another couple of minutes down a dark highway. The lack of light made things 10 times worse. And up ahead, I saw the lights of a convenience store that I use regularly, and I can remember thinking vividly, will anyone find me when this taxi finally stops? I was scared of what the driver's intentions were and what he was capable of. I think at that point, I reached my limits, and silent tears began to roll down my cheeks. What's gonna happen next? I wondered. And then to my absolute shock, we pulled into the convenience store's parking lot, and as soon as we were stopped, the driver turned around and spoke to me in a calm voice. "Hey, I'm really sorry. If you want to make a complaint about me, you can. Here's my card and all my information. You can call my bosses and tell them my name. It's all on my card." He went on to explain that he was the driver who picked me up and dropped me off on Tuesday. And because of the location that I wanted to be dropped off, he remembered me. He said he wondered why someone would want to be dropped off at a construction yard at night. And then he said, "You know that guy who was waiting in line ahead of you at the train station? Well, that guy also wanted to be dropped off by the construction yard." And I remembered that guy, the one who pushed in front of me. The driver said that while he was taking him to the construction yard, he made a couple of calls. He was saying stuff like, "Oh, yeah, I'll be there soon." And, "I think it will be about another 20 minutes after I get there." And then I was thinking, well, so what? They have a night shift in the yard. I can sometimes hear work going on when I walk past there to get home. Why is my taxi driver not taking me where I want to go? I asked him if it could have been a coincidence and what he was trying to get at, and then he replied, "Well, the guy didn't seem to be an employee. There were no cars or trucks in the parking lot, and there were no lights on in the office or in the yard. But then, I saw a minivan parked just off to the side of the entrance. It had blacked out windows, and there were about 4 people in there. And when my headlights landed on the windshield, they all ducked down, as if they didn't want to be seen. So, for that reason, I found those people and my passenger very suspicious. So, I'm really sorry that I took things into my own hands. And if you want to report me for it to my bosses, then I'm fine with that. But I could never be fine with dropping you off there with those men in that van." I stared at the driver. It looked like he had tears in the corners of his eyes waiting to come out. I wondered if there was a reason why he understood the red flags. He was a young guy, and he was taking a big risk by doing what he did. It almost made sense, but I guess that it still could have been a coincidence. But then, I remembered something that made me shiver. While I was waiting in line, my mom called me, and she didn't like it when I worked so late, and she wanted to check in with me. I remember the words I said on the phone. I said, "Yeah, I'm about to get a taxi now." "Uh-huh. Yeah, I'll get it to the construction yard. That man was in front of me at that point in the line, so it began to make sense. Maybe the driver was right. It did seem like the guy in front of me was planning on something. I've thought about it for years, and I am so grateful to the taxi driver. Of course, I didn't report him, by the way. He might just have saved me that night from those men and that blacked out minivan. And I don't want to even think of what their intentions might have been. This happened when I was in high school. At that time, I was working hard on my studies and I was staying late after class as I was part of a lot of club activities. All these extracurricular activities meant that I would end up heading home later than most kids my age. On the day that this took place, my club activities ended at around 8 p.m. So as soon as I was all done, I hopped on my bike and I rode for home. I was riding alone and I didn't have any friends who lived in the same direction that I was heading that night. It was late, but it wasn't super dark out. But I have to say that I lived in a rural area, so the cars on the roads and the streetlights were few and far between. Looking back on it now, I probably shouldn't have taken the route that I usually took to school on the way home when it was dark. It wasn't well lit, but back then I was familiar with the route and I took it to school every single morning, so I never questioned how it could appear dangerous after dark. This route involved heading down some twisting and turning alleys down by the canal. At some points, the width of the pathway got so narrow that you have to walk in a single file. It probably wasn't the best idea for me to be racing through there on my bike. I never really thought of any danger or trouble befalling me down there, and I didn't realize that it was unsafe for a teenage girl until that night. I was rushing home, not thinking about much in particular. I think I was probably wondering what was for dinner, and that's when I saw someone on the road up ahead. This guy was just stood directly in the middle of the pathway. He didn't seem to notice my bike approaching, and he made no effort to get out of the way. He was stood with his back to me, and before I got close, I knew that he was a big dude. I rang the bell on my bicycle, but he didn't seem to react. He just stood there as still as a statue. He gave me the creeps instantly. Who comes out down by the canal to stand in the dark? I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I needed to get past him. I decided that it would be worse if I slowed down altogether, so I tried my best to maneuver around the guy. I feel as if he was stood there on purpose to block the way, and I was scared to get off my bike in case anything happened. I rode as tight as I could to the edge of the pathway, scratching my arm and my bag on the branches of the bushes to the side of me, and as soon as I was next to him, I started pedaling like crazy. The most frightening thing that has ever happened to me came next. He lunged at me, and I swear, he only just missed out on grabbing my school bag. If I hadn't sped up when I was alongside him, then he would have grabbed me. It really scared me. I felt sweat pouring down my temples as I raced away from him. I looked back, and he was running, but he wasn't anywhere near fast enough to catch up to me. I carried on along my route for a little while longer, maybe like another 5 minutes. But I was shocked to see the silhouette of a person stood in the middle of the pathway again up ahead. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was the same guy. I remembered seeing his dirty-looking gray coat with my bike light illuminated it, and I felt so much unease and fear as I drew closer. He was somehow ahead of me now. It didn't make any sense. I knew that I didn't want to try and cycle past him again, so I slammed on my brakes and I did 180. I knew that there was an alleyway that led back to a busier looking street back that way. I managed to get there before the man followed me again. I don't know if he chased me that time or not because I didn't have the courage to look back behind me. I stopped my bike under a streetlight and I took out the old cell phone that my parents gave me for emergencies. I tried to call my mom, but there was no service. I got back on my bike and I just headed towards the area which had the most amount of light. And before long, I was able to find a convenience store. From there, I called Mom and I asked her to come and pick me up. I remember that my hands were trembling. I couldn't help but think that that man might turn up again at any second. I was trying to browse the magazines while waiting for my mom. I was still shaken up, but I couldn't focus on reading anything. I then saw a guy outside who looked at my bike and then decided not to come into the convenience store. I have no idea if that was related or not, but I definitely noticed it. I was so paranoid that I felt like I was being hunted. My mom arrived and then she took me home. I told her everything and I was banned from using that shortcut again. Also, if I didn't have a friend to head home and it was late, I was always to be picked up. That traumatic event has stayed with me, and to this day, I still don't like being out on the streets late at night, especially in the colder months when it's darker out. One thing that didn't make any sense to me at that time was how the man appeared ahead of me on the pathway. But I think I can explain it now though. One other night when I was on my way home, I waved goodbye to my friend, turned a corner, and then suddenly, a car sped up from behind me and overtook me while I was riding my bike on the road. It then slammed on its brakes as if to stop me from going forward. I just cycled around it the first time, thinking that it was just some older kids trying to spook me or something. But it happened again, so I knew that it wasn't a mistake. I tried to carry on cycling on the sidewalk, but then the car rode up onto the sidewalk to stop me. And I heard the driver's side door open and I just froze. If it wasn't for another car turning down the street, I'm not sure what would have happened, because as soon as I saw the other car approaching, I took the opportunity to pedal like crazy and make a few turns to try and lose the car. So, if the same person who was driving that night was the same person who stood in the middle of the pathway, I guess that after I pedaled away from him by the canal, he jumped in his car and then drove ahead to a point that he knew that I would likely pass through to wait for me again. Nothing ever happened after the second experience, but I hope that that man got arrested, and I hope no one else had to experience what I did, because I shudder to think of what it would have been like in both occasions without my bike. I don't think that I would have outran him. So then, what would have happened to me? Night 1. I'm 20 and male. I'm a pretty small guy and have a routine of walking my dog in the morning and at night. And what happened these past couple of nights does not seem normal. At 11:30 p.m., this white BMW is driving down the road, and then all of a sudden, he slows down close to me. I assume that it could be a delivery driver of some sort because other people live in our property. And after slowing down close to me, he then speeds up again, and this time, pulling into the house next to mine. I had the feeling that he was going to turn around and then come back, and he did. This time, rolling up real close behind me, and there aren't any sidewalks here. He stops for a second, and then speeds up again past me. I give him that fight or flight look, almost an angry look, and he parks sideways down the street. At this point, I just started running back to our property out of panic, and then he also drives off. Night 2. My girlfriend told me that she would prefer if I went out with another person for safety, and so tonight, we went out together instead. It was a normal walk, everything's going great, except for some paranoia. We turned around to go back home, and I hear this quack noise, like a call or a signal. I look at my girlfriend confused, and her face is pale. I then look at my dog, who is normally energetic and protective, and he has his head down and is frozen in place. I look, and I see a black figure moving towards us that came out of nowhere. I quickly rush my girlfriend and my dog home, and they sped up just as we do. As we get home, he rides past on an e-bike wearing all black, and the bike had no reflectors or night visibility. We are both terrified and unsure of what to do. Luckily, we live inside an RV on a big property with multiple people. So, that's about the only thing keeping me calm currently. Not too long ago, I was driving back home late one night. I had visited a friend of mine who moved out to the sticks. It was always a long drive, and I was feeling more tired than usual that night, so I decided to try out a shortcut that she mentioned. It was really dark out. The stars and the moon were hidden behind the thick clouds. I took the shortcut that my friend suggested, and I headed down a narrow country road. There were no streetlights, so it was hard to see my way. I always avoided the shortcut because I hate driving down dark country roads. But I wanted to get home quicker. It was late and I had work in the morning. I thought of what might happen if a car was coming in the opposite direction. We would definitely be stuck. But just as I was mentally taking note to call out my friend for her terrible shortcut suggestion, I noticed something up ahead. It was faint to begin with. It looked like a stick was glowing, and it swayed from left to right. I wondered what it was, and I strained my eyes to get a better look at it. I couldn't make out what it was, so I decided to turn up my lights to the max. In doing that, revealed the man that stood in the middle of the road, waving a lit-up traffic conducting stick thing. You know the ones, the little baton things that are intended to get the attention of the road users. He was also wearing a high-vis coat. I wondered if there was some kind of construction going on up ahead. I thought about it for a second, and I realized that it didn't make a lot of sense. It was a Sunday night, probably approaching 1 a.m., and there were no road signs or anything to indicate that there was supposed to be work ongoing on that road. As I drew closer to the traffic maintenance worker, well, that's what I presumed he was, he then guided me with his lit-up baton to pull over. I looked behind him, and I saw nothing but an open dark road. No barriers or temporary traffic lights, no workers or any form of lights behind him. It just didn't make any sense to me. That's the moment that I thought that something was definitely fishy about the situation. Also, this guy had one of those clear ponchos that people wear at the theme parks, you know? A raincoat in a sense. It wasn't even raining that night. I mean, what the hell? I wondered. I had to pull my car to stop as I was going to hit him with it. I was feeling really nervous, and I watched as he stared at me through my windshield. He then walked to the side of the car and looked in my windows. Something was wrong here. My brain was screaming that to me. He then finally stood a little off to the side and then indicated with his baton that I was clear and then to keep going. I didn't like that. I didn't want to go any further. I was really nervous of where he was telling me to go. For the record, I'm a female in my late 20s, and I wasn't sure if I could trust that man. Even though I am terrible at reversing, I decided to back up to the best of my ability, and then when there was enough space in the road, I would be able to do a 26-point turn or something just to get out of there. But as soon as I started backing up, the maintenance worker's expression changed. He looked surprised, and then he looked angry, and then desperate almost all at once. It was just unbelievable. He started power walking towards my car, and I let out a scream. He wasn't behaving like a maintenance guy anymore. He was scaring me. I knew that I needed to get away from him, so I gunned it as hard as I could in reverse to try and get away. I had to be careless and not care about bumping some of the trees, rocks, and bushes that lay at the side of the narrow road. I had to pray that a car wasn't coming up behind me too. And I watched in horror as he began to run. I had to keep checking behind me as well as keeping an eye on him, and it was incredibly stressful. But I managed to create enough distance between us to allow me to turn the car around, and there was a wider portion of the road that I used to do this in. I managed to get away from that guy. I just keep thinking of how there wasn't any traffic lights or construction signs in the area, but just one lone maintenance worker that stood on the road alone in the dark. I don't think it was a ghost or anything paranormal. That was a very real person, and I think that that person had some bad intentions. I sometimes wonder what might have been waiting for me further down the road if I kept going. An ambush? Tire spikes? Or something worse? I find it very creepy how he looked over the car, saw that I was alone, and then waved me on, and when I didn't do it, he gave chase. And needless to say, I am never trying that shortcut again. This happened quite recently, so I am keeping the names anonymous. To give some context, at the time that this incident occurred, I was a 20-year-old female living in Nagano, Japan. I had passion for live streaming on the internet. I would sing, play the guitar, and I was enjoying it so much that I streamed daily. The effort that I put into my daily stream started to pay off, and I gradually gathered a small but dedicated fan base. I had regular viewers that started to join, and I recognized their usernames. We would chat between the songs, getting to know each other a little better, and it was great to meet people who shared my taste in music. One of the regulars was a man who I will call Mr. A. Mr. A always joined the stream and is one of the people that I spoke with a lot. We shared music recommendations quite regularly, and it felt like we had a real connection to each other, even though we had never met in person. One day, when he joined the stream, I thanked him, saying something like, "Hi, Mr. A. That band that you recommended the other day was so great, so thank you." He then wrote in the chat that the band that he recommended, he was able to see them in person, and he got a limited edition signed CD from them. I casually responded with something along the lines of, "Oh wow, that's great." And this is where the horror began for me. In addition to live streaming, I also had a few social media accounts across different platforms. One afternoon, I was scrolling through my feed and a private message from Mr. A popped up. I went to read it, and it read the following. "Hey, I sent you that limited edition CD that I mentioned on your stream." I immediately thought, "Sent where? I didn't give you my address." I had never shared my address during my streams or on social media, so I was completely baffled by Mr. A's message. When I asked him what he meant, his explanation was not just surprising, but downright creepy. Mr. A had tracked down my personal social media account using my public account ID. From there, he found my sister's account, And my sister had a lax attitude toward online privacy and had publicly shared our city and town. From her account, Mr. A discovered my full name, our city, my boyfriend's name at that time, and even my parents' social media accounts. I was so freaked out by this because I had made a very conscious effort to not put anything personal on the internet. And despite my efforts to stay hidden, Mr. A managed to piece together enough details to send the CD to me via postal service hole. I was so creeped out that I picked up the CD from the post office but immediately returned it, telling Mr. A a white lie. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but it seems like the information you looked up about me was wrong, so I didn't get that CD. It should make its way back to you though." At this point, I was trying not to upset him. I mean, I did like chatting with him when he joined my live streams. He had just kind of ruined that relationship though. Since I returned that CD, I felt as if Mr. A's kindness turned to malice. Mr. A's friendly demeanor seemed to turn into something more sinister. His next message, seemingly advice, but potentially a subtle warning or a threat, it said, "Be careful leaving your personal information online. There are people out there who might misuse it." Then, the harassment began. He created numerous accounts with variations of my name and birth date, following my accounts with all these weird new user profiles. Let me explain. If my birthday was January 1st, the accounts would be named things like my name 0101. It is unnerving to see accounts with private information in their names that start to follow me. He also tweeted about places in my town, making me feel as if I was being watched. There was no direct threats, but the fear of being constantly monitored became overwhelming. I think he was being very careful. He knew if I said anything, he could just claim that tweeting about a shop in my town wasn't a crime. I bet he thought he was being really smart. But then the situation escalated. Mr. A tweeted from his account, "I got the Zenrin maps and phone directories. Just a little more to go." Zenrin is Japan's database of a residential map and is used for route planning. It's very accurate. And when he mentioned he was looking into that database and said he only needed a little bit more to go, it downright terrified me. That short tweet sent shivers down my spine. It was clear that Mr. A was trying to pinpoint my exact address. And up to that point, he only knew my city and town, which gave me some comfort. But the thought of him finding my house horrified me, not just for my safety, but also for my family. We couldn't just pack up and move. My parents weren't renting, they were paying to own the house. I felt so scared because if he knew all our names in our city, finding our exact address seemed inevitable. I started obsessively checking Mr. A's account every day, praying that he wouldn't figure out our address. But my hopes were dashed when Mr. A got dangerously close. He identified my grandparents' house from a photo of a nearby rice field that I had posted on my private account. The photo barely showed anything but fields, yet he managed to use Google Maps and the Zenrin directories to narrow down the area, looking for homes with our surname. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to contact the police, hoping that they would intervene without escalating the situation. Their suggestion to directly confront Mr. A with a warning made me reluctant. However, I followed their advice and I sent a cautious message to Mr. A, hoping that it would put him off doing whatever he was plotting. I remember shaking as I was typing, not sure if that was fear or maybe adrenaline, but I wrote, "I have gotten in touch with the police. You need to stop." He came back almost instantly with a chilling yet cowardly response. He said, I have no idea what you're talking about. After that, his numerous fake accounts began gradually disappearing one by one. The tweets about finding my address also stopped, and his dismissive response and the subsequent disappearance of his fake accounts brought temporary relief. But the damage was done. Since then, I haven't faced any direct harm from Mr. A. Years have passed, but the memories of that time linger. I still catch myself checking Mr. A's account, a habit born from those anxious days and the long nights. I'm not scared anymore, but I am very aware, if that makes any sense at all. The internet still is a source of joy, but social media is mainly a reminder of the darker side of human nature for me. I stopped live streaming and I deleted all my social media accounts. Erasing my accounts did come with some tears, but it was for the best. I had to do what I could to protect myself and my family. I learned a harsh lesson about privacy. It's a lesson that I will carry with me. I will always be cautious about what I share and who I trust. The scariest thing about my experience was not just the invasion of privacy, but the realization that behind the screens, humans can be the real monsters. I just hope that he wasn't doing this to others online like what he did to me, especially to those who weren't so careful with the information they share. Reflecting on the whole experience, it's alarming how someone can piece together your life from bits of information shared online. The fact that Mr. A could track down my family members, use public records, and even analyze photos to find my location was beyond my wildest nightmares. In the aftermath, I became almost paranoid about my online presence. I would spend hours going through old posts, deleting anything that could be even remotely revealing, and I changed my passwords frequently. I set all my profiles to private, and I stopped engaging with anyone that I didn't know personally. The internet felt less like a community and more like a potential threat. The support from my family and friends was crucial during this time. My sister felt particularly guilty. We forgave her, of course, but it was a wake-up call. Despite the fear and anxiety, I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. I focused on my studies, spent more time with loved ones, and I found other hobbies to fill the void left by my streaming. Even now and then, I would consider returning to live streaming, but the thought of another Mr. A lurking in the shadows always held me back. I continue to hope that Mr. A has moved on, and no one else falls victim to him. This happened a few days ago when I, a 19-year-old male, went to a festival in a city 2 hours away from my home. I booked a hotel room for 3 days, and this happened on the second day. I just woken up and I was slightly hungover, so I decided to go eat late lunch. This was at about 5 p.m. I got back at around 7 p.m., and as I was approaching the entrance to the hotel, a guy in a suit holding a computer bag followed me to the door. He looked professional, like he just got back from some sort of meeting, so I didn't think too much about it. I had an empty bottle of Coke in one hand, so I struggled to pull out my card to open the door. I found it weird that he just stood behind me when he could have just opened the door if he was staying in that hotel, but I really did not realize that until after. And once I got in the building, however, I noticed his weird behavior. He followed me to the reception because I needed to throw away the bottle, and that's when I realized that he was following me back to the elevators. When I got to the elevators, he stood a few feet beside me and watched me press the up button. I was getting more and more suspicious of this guy, and I got really anxious when he walked into the elevator with me. I gave my back to him, and I pressed my floor number, and I moved to the right to let him press his floor number, which he didn't. And that set off my alarms. I have social anxiety, and I couldn't bring myself to confront him. So I just stood in silence and I waited for the door to open. When the door opened, I walked out, and he followed close behind me. My room was at the end of the hall, and he followed me about halfway before a group of girls, clearly tipsy, came out of the room, and by God's graces, I somehow knew one of them. I made a big deal out of meeting her, and they invited me to go clubbing with them. I obliged, and I just talked with them as I watched the guy slowly reverse to the elevators and then get on one. When we finally went down, I noticed that he was not in the lobby, and I did not see him for the rest of my stay. I really don't know what that was about, but it shook me to my core. Like I said, I have really bad anxiety at times, and this made me feel like vomiting. What scared me even more is that I am physically a big guy. I hit the gym almost every day and I tower over most people. So, I never thought that something like this would happen to me. What freaks me out the most is that he just followed me so blatantly. I really don't know what to make of what happened, but if anyone has any idea as to what this guy was up to, please feel free to share. My name is Mary. I'm a female, and I'm 27 years old. And when I was promoted to a position at the accounting head office, it felt like a dream come true. The pay increase was a significant bonus, and I was excited about the new responsibilities that came with my role. I threw myself into my work. I was so eager to prove that I deserved the promotion. However, the one aspect that I didn't enjoy about my new job was my new team of coworkers. In particular, there was one coworker who seemed to have taken a special interest in me. His name was Tom, and he was fairly popular in the office. People often gossiped about him, and many thought that we would make a cute couple. They even had a word for it. Shipping, they called it. As if my life were some sort of a romantic drama that they all watched unfold. But for me, it felt more like a nightmare. I had no interest in Tom, and from the moment that I started in my new position, he seemed to spend a lot of time hovering around my cubicle. His constant presence was unnerving, and I did my best to keep the interactions brief and professional. I even asked him to leave me alone more than once, trying to make it clear that I wasn't interested in anything beyond a working relationship with him. But despite my efforts, Tom persisted. He often stopped by my desk with flimsy excuses, asking for a date at every opportunity. His presence was draining me, and I found myself dreading encounters with him more and more. And finally one day, I reached my breaking point. I told him plainly how I felt, making it clear that I wish he would leave me alone. And I hoped that that would be the end of it. The next day, I was busy completing a report when I realized that I needed a hard copy. I went to the printer, only to find out that there was no paper inside. Frustrated, I looked around for help and I saw a coworker nearby. He happened to be one of Tom's friends and mentioned that the paper was in the storeroom. And to my dismay, he called Tom over to show me where the supplies were kept. I felt trapped in a setup, but I just decided to get it over with as quickly as possible. Surprisingly, Tom seemed unusually helpful, leading me to the supply closet without his usual obnoxious attempts to ask me out. I hoped that this meant that he had taken my words to heart. And when we entered the closet, the door clicked shut behind us. I immediately felt uneasy and I tried the handle, only to hear laughter from the other side. My heart sank as I realized that I had been set up. I turned to face Tom, who wore a smug expression, and he told me that he wouldn't open the door until I agreed to have a date with him. My annoyance turned to anger, and I began to yell at him, telling him how wrong this was. I was not playing hard to get as he claimed. I genuinely did not like him, and his actions only proved why. But instead of backing down, Tom laughed, insisting that I drop the act. My anger turned to fear when he stepped forward, his hand clamping over my mouth to stop me talking. Panic surged through me as I realized my situation. I was locked in a room with someone who didn't respect boundaries. Tom, now angry, accused me of being a tease and pushed me against the wall. Tears began to well up in my eyes, and I felt trapped and helpless. But just when despair threatened to overwhelm me, the door swung open, and our supervisor stood there, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. Relief flooded through me as I broke free from Tom's grasp, and I rushed out of the supply closet to safety. My supervisor sternly instructed Tom to follow him to the office, where they had an intense discussion about what just had occurred. From what I had gathered, my screaming was heard outside, and someone alerted my supervisor. The incident was reported, and an investigation followed. Many coworkers who had once thought of Tom as charming were shocked by his behavior. And as a result of his actions, Tom was fired for sexual harassment and misconduct in the workplace. And the other people who helped the setup were written up. I was not satisfied with that, but oh well, better than nothing, I guess. Though the experience was terrifying, I was immensely grateful for the support from my supervisor and the swift action taken by the company. It was a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that it's crucial to stand firm in your boundaries. After this, I just focused on my work, though I have been a bit vigilant when I'm outside of the office. I'm kinda paranoid if Tom would show up again to get revenge on me or something. I do hope that he is not out there doing this to other women. So, creepy Tom who can't understand the word no, let's not meet again. It was summer break, and we, my family, didn't go on any trip. Unlike every break, I was just 8 years old, and my younger sister was 3. We were playing along with other kids who lived in the same building as us, just on different floors. The building is not exactly an apartment building. It's more of a multi-storied house. The front gate is a bit further from there and the only entrance and exit of the building. So, since we were downstairs and playing, anybody who would enter or exit the building would be visible to us, and we would greet them because every tenant knows us and we know them, as well as their family members who might visit them. A new person visiting any tenant is rare but not impossible. Right adjacent to the big entrance gate is a small old-style window with a grill, but it has a small opening at the bottom. We were all playing, but then I got tired and I sat on one of the chairs placed at the porch-like place. I'm not sure what to call it, to be honest. From where the window thingy falls on my right side, and I can see it as well as the gate clearly. I was just looking out when I noticed a man staring at the gate, which looked similar to this. So, basically, he was able to look at my sister and friends through it. It concerned me when I realized that he wasn't even trying to look away and just staring at them blankly. I turned around from where I was sitting to signal my friend to move to the other side away from his sight, which she didn't understand. Frustrated, I turned back and I was about to stand up when my gaze fell on the guy, and he was now staring at me. My body froze, and I could feel fear creeping up on me. I couldn't move. I don't know why I stared back at him. And suddenly, he started smiling. And when I say smiling, I mean full-on grinning from ear to ear. That scared the soul out of me, and I mustered some courage. I then got up and I ran towards my friends. I didn't tell them anything, and I just asked them to go upstairs with me, which thankfully they did without questioning. I didn't tell anything about this to my parents because I thought that they would stop me from going downstairs to play. The next day, we again came to play and I looked through the window just to make sure that he wasn't there. Fortunately, he wasn't. Or so I thought. 15 minutes in, I spot the guy again. He was again standing at the very spot and staring at us, at me. I tried to play it cool because my friends knew nothing about him, but I couldn't for long and then we went back again. From what I remember, this happened for 3 to 4 days, and now my friends started to complain about how I don't let them play and that they have to come back earlier than they are supposed to. On the 5th day, or 4th, I don't remember correctly, I made up my mind to not pay attention to him and just focus on playing. We were playing cricket that evening and I was batting. I hit the ball hard, causing it to go over the gate, which was a very normal thing. And as per rules made by us, the one responsible must fetch the ball. My heart started beating because I could see his grin getting wider and creepier. He went towards the ball on the road and then picked it up. He then held his hand out, gesturing for me to come and take it. I was shit scared at this point, but I had to go, so I did. And as soon as I reached to take the ball from his hand, he bent, coming close to my ear, and his words are still ringing clearly in my ears till this day. He said, "I'm a good man. Look at the window when you go inside. I'll leave something for you." That sent shivers down my spine, and I ran with the speed of light. After we were done playing, I saw him sliding a piece of paper from that little opening. He then looked at me, grinned, and then waved goodbye. I grabbed the paper and I opened it. He had written his phone number and asked me to call him sharp at 2 in the afternoon, that he knew my parents would be asleep by that time. It was also written that if I don't do it, my friends' lives would be in danger. As an 8-year-old, I didn't know any better, so I called him through my mother's phone. He picked up the call, and I didn't have the courage to say anything, so I was silent. He said, "You're a good girl. Just like me, you should come stay with me. Come outside. I'm waiting to pick you up." Because I live upstairs, I went to the balcony and he was actually standing near the gate, looking directly at me and waving and smiling. I couldn't contain it anymore, so I started crying and I disconnected the call. I ran inside and I bawled my eyes out in my room. Thankfully, my mother didn't wake up and I cried it all out. I didn't go out for the next few weeks and everybody kept asking me about it. I still didn't tell them though. That guy stopped coming too. I don't remember the time he stopped coming, but he did and I was relieved. Eventually, this experience started fading and I grew up. Fast forward to 10 years, I was 18 and my mother asked me to buy some snacks. I took my sister and then we went out. The shop that I had to go to was at the end of the road, several houses away, so not too far. I was standing in a queue when I felt uncomfortable because of the man standing behind me, because he kept pushing me. Annoyed, I looked at him, only to realize that it was the same man. My face went pale and I could feel my heart throbbing in my throat. I tried not to panic and I calmed myself down by telling myself that he couldn't do anything in public, that there were tons of people there, and that gave me a sense of security. And as soon as my order came, I took out my wallet hastily to pay, but he beat me to it. The owner looked at him weirdly and then at me, because I was a regular there and he was seeing this man for the first time. I paid for it anyway, and the owner politely asked him to take his money back. I gave the bag to my sister and I asked her to go home to inform our mom about a man following us. And just in case that he attacks, I'll have a backing and she would be safe too. Our house is within the vision range of the shop, so I waited for her to get inside. And now, it's my turn to go home. As soon as I stepped out, the man followed me and said something like, "You're a beautiful lady now. Let's catch up." I kept walking and walking, but now they were far from the shop and he started speed walking and I had to walk faster. I could feel goosebumps all over my body. I started running and I could see him catching up to my speed when the owner of the shop called for him loudly, saying that some of his money was still at the counter and asking him to come back, which gave me enough time to get inside and lock the gate. I haven't seen him since that day and it's been 2 years. I'm 20 right now and I hope to never meet him anywhere in the future. I hope I never see him again. I don't know why it has instilled a paranoia in me and I dread seeing him when I turn 28. Update. I told my mom everything after that because my dad lives in another city for work. I didn't tell him since it would make him hella worried and possibly affect his work. My distant uncle is a local cop and is quite close and trustworthy. We tried finding the creepy guy after that but couldn't. He literally vanished in thin air. We also asked the shop owner about him, but he said the guy came back, took his money, and then went away. Nobody else paid any attention to this guy, so we couldn't find anything. I go to college by public transport, so I have to walk around 1 kilometer to reach the stop. I take the other road, which is opposite to the road that leads to the shop. It does take longer comparatively, but I feel better at least. Not once have I seen that guy or felt anything creepy since then, which is a relief. But again, I'm kind of paranoid every time that I step out, though I do carry pepper spray and a sharp keychain with me all the time. About moving out, well, we can't afford that just yet. Possibly after I complete my degree, which still has 3 years left. So this happened less than 30 minutes ago, and I immediately thought of this sub, and I wanted to see what all of you thought. I'm a single female living alone on the 3rd floor of a row home in Philadelphia. The house has been modified into 3 separate apartment units, and I am on the top floor. I ran through a property management group, and a few days ago, they let me know that they would be sending someone out to repitch my window AC unit as it has been leaking and the water was getting in through the window downstairs. It's an old building, so it's more of their problem than mine. So I said, "Cool, no problem." They send out a guy who I assume they have contracted, but is not necessarily a part of the property management group. He comes in, makes some light small talk with me about my 2 cats, and then he gets to work. There was nothing out of the ordinary. He finishes in about 15 minutes, lets me know that he is done, and then he leaves my unit. About 2 minutes later, I hear him knock on my door again. I usher for him to come in, and he then proceeds to ask me if I have an extra key for the main door downstairs. I tell him that my neighbors, whom I am close friends with, have my only extra copy, and that I only have one in my possession. He then proceeds to ask about nearby Home Depots and the like, questioning as to the closest place where he can get a key copied. I ask him straight up if he is implying that I give him a key so that he can go make a copy, and then he said yes. That the property management asked him to ask me about it while he was there because they lost theirs. I politely told him that that was not going to happen, and I suggested that he take it up with them if that's the case. I then called my property management company to confirm this information with them, or to report the incident just in case. They never answer the phone, so I ended up leaving a voicemail, and I plan to follow up with an email as well. A small detail to add, I could have sworn that I heard him messing with one of the doors downstairs after he left my unit the second time. The key to the main building is obviously different than the keys to get into each of our individual units. So, having a key to the main door is only the first step, but being that both I and the unit below me are single females living alone, I didn't like this one bit. This is weird, right? Or am I bugging? Update. My property management group answered the second time that I called. My guess is that I was speaking to one of the leasing agents. She was pretty useless, sounded unbothered when I told her the story, and basically said that she would follow up with the contractor, but that she didn't really know anything about the service order because this was not a property that she personally managed. I planned to give the other tenants a heads up. In his defense, he did not give me any weird vibes prior to, and even in his request, he sounded innocuous enough. However, I don't know which door he was messing with, the downstairs or main, but he was messing with one. I thought about popping out to ask him what he was doing, but instead, I opted to call my neighbor friend and loudly explain to her the situation that had just occurred, making sure to emphasize that I thought that it was weird and that I was calling the property management company to fact check. The walls in this place are thin, so if I could hear him, he could definitely still hear me. I just saw another post on this sub, and it made me think about this weird dude that I met last year. So I decided that I want to do a little story time because I totally forgot this happened to me a bit ago. I'm 20 now, and this happened in like October or November, so not even a year ago. I was homeless and I was couch hopping with friends or sleeping in my friends' cars, and I was drinking a lot and etc. One of my friends had met this dude in the same neighborhood who they did deals with. This neighborhood is known for old crackheads basically, so he was a bit younger, but looked like he definitely dabbled in some hard drugs. He had a sunken face and eyes with scabs on his face too. He was generous and welcoming though. He was obsessed with his cat, so I thought he was an innocent guy. Her BF, and I think one or two more people and I go and chill to drink at his house. He was a cool dude, a little weird, but he was alright, and I can get along with weird people. After a few hours roll by and everyone's ready to go home, my friend asked me where I needed to go for the night. I, of course, didn't have a plan. I never did. And that guy then offered to let me stay there after hearing my situation. I said yes very hesitantly because for some reason, my skin kind of crawled when he offered. I don't know if it was intuition or what, and my friend then insisted and said that I should stay there if I have nowhere else. I then agreed, and then everyone left. He then yapped my ear off about spiritual things that didn't make sense. He then said that he was going to bed and offered for me to sleep in his room. I walked into his room to check it out, and he had a day bed that pulls out another bed at the bottom. So I was like, okay, I don't have to sleep with him, so this could work. Also, I forgot to mention, this is a trailer home that was not very well kept up with. The dishes were nasty and piling up, and they were attracting all sorts of bugs. The counters were covered in resin, tobacco, soda, just looked like it's never been cleaned before. The living room was clean, but that was it. He then started clearing some clothes off the upper part of the bed so he can lay down, and then stopped and was like, never mind. We can both just sleep on the bottom one. I then looked at him and said, You know what? I think I'll just sleep on the couch. It's okay. He then insisted that it was okay and that he wasn't gonna be weird, and he was acting like a kid begging me to buy him a toy. I insisted on sleeping on the couch, and then he got upset and then laid in his bed. But then, like 30 minutes later, he says from the other room something like, "You know what? This is weird. Maybe you should just stay here." He then proceeds to say that he needs to be alone, and I'm like, "Dude, at this point, it's 3 a.m. You're whining because I won't sleep in the bed with you. I don't know you." And then, he kept insisting on me sleeping in the room with him. I keep declining and I say that I'm going to sleep. He says fine, but that he's kicking me out in the morning, and that was totally okay with me. Morning comes around and he wakes up making pancakes. I then ask if he can drop me off at work since I'm working in the morning. He said yes and acted like nothing happened the night before, and then started yapping my ear off again about spiritual bullshit. It was time for me to go to work, so I finally leave this man's house and he drops me off at work. I work all day, and while I was still at work, during night, he somehow got my number from someone and then texted me. He said something like, "Hey, I got a case of beer and some weed if you want to come over." I told him that I had other plans, and then he texted me that I said that I told him that I would hang out with him later. Well, I never said that, so I just ignored him. He then texted me a couple more times with a question mark or a hello, and I ignored all of them. Fast forward, I think a week or two later, this man then comes into my job and asks someone for a job interview. I recognized him, and I was very scared because I did not want him working with me at all. He gets an interview from my manager somehow, and then he leaves. My coworker came up to me and was like, "Hey, have you seen that weird dude that just came in?" I mentioned that I somewhat knew him and that he is in fact very weird. He then brought up that maybe he was trying to stalk me. This was a joke at first and we laughed about it, but then he continued his work, but he did warn the managers about what I told him just in case, and the manager emailed him immediately saying that he wasn't hired, and I was very relieved. But then, I shit you not even an hour later, this guy comes back to my job with a different outfit and then asks for an interview. This time he was looking around the place all sketchy, and I then ran into the bathroom because now I think this man is stalking me for real. Thankfully, the first person that saw him was my coworker who I was just talking to, and thank God, he seems to be a smart, protective man because he then tells the creepy guy that he just came in an hour ago and already got an interview and didn't get hired, and that he needed to get the hell out. He did leave, but not without a bit of arguing. After I got out of the bathroom, my coworker gave me the rundown on what happened and said that the guy was definitely bad news and told me to never go near that guy again, and I haven't. I don't know what could have transpired from that, but it probably wasn't anything good. I was 11 years old when this happened, and I'm currently female and 24. I was visiting my dad and my stepmom over the summer in Saskatchewan, Canada. My dad worked long days during the week, so on her day off, he had planned for my stepmom to take my sister, who was 8 at that time, and also I, out for a date to get some bonding time in with us, as we didn't know her super well yet. She took us to get our nails done, to the mall, and on the way home, we stopped at the McDonald's. We planned on eating inside in the restaurant, but it was very busy, so my stepmom asked my sister and I to find a table and wait there while she went to the counter to order food. I noticed this rough, older-looking woman, possibly in her 60s or 70s, and she was looking towards the direction of the table that my sister and I were seated at. All I could remember is thinking that she looked like a drugged-out Susan Boyle. She looked possibly homeless and addicted, so I didn't give her much of a thought, letting her do her own thing, and I just tried to talk to my sister about random stuff. Once my stepmom came back to the table, this woman was seemingly already approaching us and then stopped beside us. She just said hello, so we all kind of said hi back and tried to ignore her. She asked if we were my stepmom's daughters, so she says, "They're my stepdaughters," trying to be simple to kind of shut her down. The lady says that we were beautiful girls and then begins to walk towards the door. She stops one last time and then asks how old we are. We had the impression she was on her way out, so my stepmom just says to her, 11 and 8. Her eyes lit up and she looked at me with a strange look. She said, "I've always wanted an 11-year-old. I'd buy her from you." That definitely crossed the line, so my stepmom finally tells her that we are trying to eat lunch and asks her what she's even saying in a somewhat aggressive tone. The lady got one last look at me, and then she finally left. She definitely didn't have the money to buy me, even if I was for sale anyways, so I wasn't worried. I think she was possibly on some drugs and not in the right mind. But knowing my shy ass at 11, I wouldn't have known how to get rid of this lady if she tried to talk to us without my stepmom there. We weren't super close then, but I respected her a lot after that day for being ready to protect us, even in a minor situation like that. When I was 14 or 15, I used to have absolutely no stranger danger awareness at all. I didn't mind being out at night on my own. I'd go down back streets on my own. Any basic safety techniques just didn't bother me because I thought that I would always be fine. One day, I was walking back from town and I thought that I would take my usual shortcut down the alleyways behind the high street. I'm quite happily walking when I round the corner into a guy who's loitering, and then we lock eyes straight away. I thought the polite thing to do was smile, and thankfully, he smiled back. I decided that he's no threat, and I just walk right by him. Then, I hear him say something about my smile. I shout thanks over my shoulder and then I carry on. I turn down another corner, and so does he. And now he's saying that he likes my trainers, so I yell another thanks. He asks me where I got them from, and I say I don't know. And now I'm speeding up because this dude's definitely following me. I turn down onto the main road where I know there will be people, hoping that this will deter him. Well, nope, there he is, following behind me, still trying to get me to engage. I come to a busy crossing and I know that he's about to catch up to me. And as safely as I could, which was probably not that safe, I just bolted across the road, leaving him waiting on the other side still shouting something at me. I ran across another road and I dived into a convenience store and I called the person who was looking after me at that time. They told me to stay there and that she was coming to get me. While I was on the phone with her, I see the man round the corner looking around. He's even checking between cars and everything. And thankfully, he gave up pretty quickly and seemed to leave. My care worker called the police and 2 officers came, but they weren't overly concerned. I guess he hadn't technically done anything. But what was interesting was that they did seem to know from the description who it was likely to be, and said that they are in touch with the people who work with him. Anyway, about 4 days later, I go to a coffee place that I used to read in not far from there, and it didn't even cross my mind that I might see him again. In my head, it was all sorted, done, dusted. I take a seat near the toilets and I start reading when the toilet door opens and the big blue coat that I described to the police a few days earlier emerges. I stare at him in fear and he briefly regards me and then he carries on past. I have no idea if he recognized me or not, and it didn't seem like it. So safe to say, I'm a lot more careful now. Hello everyone, my name is Molly, and I wanted to share my story, so here goes. Every morning at the crack of dawn, I would trudge into the little coffee shop where I work part-time. The early hours were grueling, but the routine had its comforts. The shop, with its warm lights and the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee, felt like a small bustling world of its own. As a university student, balancing my work and my studies was challenging, but I did enjoy the independence, and my co-workers too, they were nice and hilarious. That particular morning seemed no different from any other. I set up the shop, filled the grinder with beans, and I did my best to prepare for the onslaught of regulars who relied on us to kickstart their day. The mingling of voices, orders, and the hiss of the espresso machine became a familiar symphony that I found strangely soothing. I was halfway through my shift when she walked in. An older woman with a striking appearance. Her hair was short and spiked, the sort of style one might call edgy. She wore dark sunglasses and a leopard print jacket that certainly stood out amidst the usual crowd of business suits and the casual commuters. But still, it's none of my business, so I just greeted her with my customary smile, ready to take her order. The woman, with a confident air, approached the counter and without removing her sunglasses, ordered a drink that was nothing short of a barista's challenge. It was a concoction of espresso, rare syrups, non-dairy milk substitutions, all to be crafted with precision. She also requested a bagel toasted just so. As I worked on her order, she struck up a conversation, and her voice was loud enough to draw the attention of the other customers. "So, what's your name?" she asked, a question that I couldn't really sidestep while on the job. "Molly," I answered, maintaining politeness even as I felt a slight edge in her curiosity. She repeated my name, and despite her chatty demeanor, I sensed an intensity in her that was unsettling. As I handed her the drink and the bagel, she smiled widely, reaching into her handbag, and then she pulled out a slip of paper, scribbled something on it, and then extended it towards me. Her number. She insisted that I take it, expressing a desire to hear from me soon. I kind of hesitated, trying to think of a way to refuse without causing a scene that might disrupt the flow of the morning. But her insistence was so unnerving that I found myself just accepting the paper with the intention of discarding it later. And with a wink, she left the shop. Once she was gone, I discreetly tossed the slip into the recycling bin, hoping that she wouldn't return. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of steaming milk and grinding coffee beans. I tried to shake off the encounter, just focusing instead on the usual rhythm of my day. As the clock ticked towards the end of my shift, I began to relax. The thoughts of my afternoon classes and also catching up with friends filled my mind as I prepared my stuff to leave. I said my goodbyes to my coworkers, and then I headed out the door. Outside, the world felt vibrant and alive, a contrast to the structured environment of the cafe. I took a deep breath of fresh air and I was ready to embrace the rest of my day. Until I saw her. The woman from the morning, leaning casually against a car, sunglasses perched on her head as her sharp eyes locked into mine. I paused, unsure how to react. She pushed off from the car, approaching with an air of casual confidence that was borderline arrogant to me, and she expressed her disappointment that I hadn't called her. Her tone was light, but with an undertone that sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to explain that I wasn't interested. I was hoping that my politeness would diffuse the situation, but she pressed, demanding to know why not. I felt cornered, and honesty seemed the only course for me. I told her that I wasn't interested in women, hoping that she would understand and then leave me alone. But then her demeanor changed. She was angry, she was frustrated. She accused me of being brainwashed, and she ranted about how I didn't know what I was missing. I repeated my refusal, more firmly this time, and I turned to leave. But she wasn't done. Her hand shot out, grabbing my arm, and her grip was firm and unyielding. A jolt of fear coursed through me as I tried to pull away, my mind racing with possible ways to escape the situation. And just then, help arrived in the form of my co-workers, who had just clocked out as well. Seeing the confrontation, they then rushed over and they urged her to leave. They also told her that if she didn't listen, they would be calling the police. Reluctantly, she released her grip. There was a look of irritation clearly on her face. She muttered something inaudible, then she retreated to her car, and then gave me one last glare before she left. As she drove away, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders, though my heart continued to race. My coworker stayed with me until I felt steady enough to head to class. In the days that followed, I just couldn't calm down. I always felt like someone was watching me. I was also paranoid that the woman would just come again and cause a scene. So I kind of altered my routine slightly, taking different paths to class and keeping an eye out for unfamiliar faces. And thankfully, I didn't see that woman again. For context, I live in the UK, and this happened when I was around 9, and this is a true encounter. My friend had come over and we had decided to go to a sweet shop, which was a few minutes walk down my house. We picked a few treats, went to the cashier, and while we were in the queue, I remember her saying that thank God that we were alone to play peacefully at home. And I meant alone, as in the fact that this time, her mom didn't send her younger sister who would annoy us. And now looking back, I think this man heard and thought that we were home alone entirely. Skip to when we were about to pay. This older man looked like he was in his late 40s, offered to pay for us. We politely refused, but upon his insistence, we didn't know any better as little girls, so we accepted. I actually remember being happy that I saved on my pocket money that day. We were leaving the shop, and I saw the man get into a car which had a few other men inside, and then he even waved at us. We were walking home, and I noticed his car behind us, but I didn't give it much thought. Until he slowed down to match our pace and rolled down the window, telling us that he was on a call with my dad, who told him to drop us home. We got a bit scared because I don't know this man, and why would my dad tell him to drop us home when he doesn't even know we left home because he's at work? We said no, to which he said, "I paid for your sweets. Won't you pay me back?" We started walking faster. It was daytime, so he couldn't have forced us in because I remember it being a sunny day, so more people than usual were in the park that was within eyes distance away from us, forcing us would mean noise, which would attract attention. Within a few minutes, we got home thankfully, but moments later, we heard the doorbell ring. My mom was at home and she answered the door. This man was startled and stuttered. He said, do you need help with the garden? I'm a garden cleaner." My mom then declined. At first, we didn't tell her about what had happened because we were too scared, but then we did it later, and she did report this to the police. But I don't know what happened next. Now, I think, what if we were home alone? What if we opened the door? And worse, what if we sat in the car? Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.